Coming up on MacBreak Weekly, I, Mikah Sargent, am subbing in for Leo Laporte, and this week we've got a great show for you. First, we kick things off with Jason Snell's review of the M2 MacBook Air. That's right, he's got it in hand, and he's ready to talk about it. What's good, what's great, and what could use work. We also talk about some interesting legal cases. Apple Pay is under fire, and Apple is trying to deal with the fact that some folks feel that there are some antitrust concerns related to Apple's grip on payment processing on iOS. Then we talk about Apple Arcade and how some games are leaving before we discuss Apple's whole slate of subscription offerings. And finally, some movement on that ongoing case where different purchasers of Apple's Mac computers said, look, that keyboard you've been including in the laptops, not so great. A $50 million settlement. All that plus so much more coming up on MacBreak Weekly.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is MacBreak Weekly, episode 827, recorded Tuesday, July 19th, 2022. A response with lots of nines. This episode of MacBreak Weekly is brought to you by Nuvei. Say goodbye to abandoned carts, poor approval rates, and high chargebacks with Nuvei, the platform fast-forwarding to the next generation of payments. Turn payments into powerful accelerators for your business at Nuvei.com. And by New Relic. Use the data platform made for the curious. Right now, you can get access to the whole New Relic platform and 100 gigabytes of data per month free forever with no credit card required. Sign up at newrelic.com/MacBreak. And by ITProTV. Give your team an engaging IT development platform to level up their skills. Volume discounts start at 5 seats. Go to ITPro.tv/MacBreak. Make sure to mention MacBreak30 to your designated ITProTV account executive to get 30% off or more on a business plan. It's time for MacBreak Weekly. Leo Laporte is still cruising USA. I don't know, cruising Alaska. But I, Mikah Sargent, am here with you today to talk about all things Mac and Apple with some of the greatest gents out there. Joining us from just down the highway. Yes, it's Jason Snell of sixcolors.com. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Mikah. Good to be back. I guess now it's official that I'm going to be on this show because 1 week, I'm just a guest. 2 weeks, now I'm a regular.
He is officially a regular. Also irregular, but that's beside the point. And also joining us from WGBH in Boston, it's Andy Ihnatko. Hello, Andy.
Hello, Mikah.
How are you?
I'm marinating slightly. It's really quite unpleasant here in New England. I'm used to ducking out of the top 10 degrees of what people are suffering in Boston because I'm close to the coast. And right now, I'm about to tell anyone who's listening that, hey man, I can hear the fans in your room. No, the fans are staying on. The fans are staying on.
That's what that sound is.
Unless you want to hear the musings of Heat Stroke Andy, which would be amusing as hell.
Heat stroke Andy. I feel like there's a jingle there, but yeah, I was wondering what those sounds were. Now I know. So now that we've addressed it, it's fine, right? Yes. And also joining us, perhaps with even louder fans, but he's got some special filter that's making it all go away. It's Alex Lindsay. How are you, Alex?
Doing much better.
Good.
Well.
Yes,
Well.
You are here this week. We had a little dropout from you last week, but glad to have you back this week, and glad everything's okay. I know everybody had their own theories.
It was a long trip, and it was a long COVID train. It started on the day during the show, and we were talking before the show. It was, I told the COVID train, "Hey, can you wait for me?" And it said, I need you to get out right now. So anyway, sorry for disappearing, but I thought you guys handled it quite well from what I could hear as I laid down. So, yeah, doing much better now.
Good. Glad to have you back. So let's kick things off. I have to say, I was very excited this morning. I woke up and I looked at my phone, and there were two things I was looking for. One was a notification from my doctor for the results of my COVID test to make sure that I didn't have it. And I was negative for COVID and the 2 variants of flu that they're testing for now. So yay, that was exciting. But one I wasn't expecting, but that I did get, was a notification from FedEx saying that a package from Apple was on its way. A package I wasn't expecting to get until mid-August is now coming this coming Tuesday, not today, but this next Tuesday. And that is an M2 MacBook Air that I thought I was going to have to wait a lot longer for. But some folks, Jason Snell included, have an early look at the MacBook Air and have done a review. So tell us, Jason, what your thoughts are on the new M2 MacBook Air.
Mikah, is this your card?
Oh my God, how did you guess?
I guessed it was M2 MacBook Air. It's here for some people, mostly base configurations. But yeah, it sounds like they're starting to ship to everybody else. I got mine a couple of weeks ago. Couldn't talk about it last week. Was not allowed. Had to pretend I didn't have it. But it's here now. I've been a big fan of the MacBook Air since the early days. I actually had that first MacBook Air that was terrible, but I loved it because it was so small. And then fortunately, they got rid of that and replaced it with the one that we all know and love in 2010. And it's been Apple's most popular laptop for basically the last decade. And this is a big redesign in the sense that it's really based on that design language from the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros that were introduced last year. So they've got the wedge shape is out, the little kind of curvy edges are out, and instead you've got this sort of flat, kind of like the curves right on the edges, but otherwise perfectly flat. It's got MagSafe, it's got 2 USB-C ports, and an M2 processor that we already know because it's the same one that was in that MacBook Pro that was released last month. And yeah, it's a new era for the MacBook Air. And I just want to point out something, which is that I gave the headline A New Era and spelled it out. I noticed that The Verge's story about it was also headlined A New Era, but they decided to say AIR-A because they didn't trust their readers to get it.
No.
I trust my readers to get it.
Thank you for not having contempt for your readers. So I have to say, I was kind of surprised. So I got the midnight version, and I got the one with 8-core CPU, 10-core GPU, 16 gigs of RAM, and a terabyte of storage. So I thought, I'm going to have to wait, and that's fine. So I was shook and shocked when I saw that it's supposed to be coming this next week. I know that lots of base configuration models were shipping on time or arriving on time, but have any of you seen any other folks talking about how theirs that was originally pushed further out are coming sooner? Or was this just kind of a fluke for me?
I've heard that the 16 with terabyte is actually like a secret. They seem to have built a bunch of those because I've heard a bunch of those being in stock in Apple stores too. And that's a tip for those of you who really are desperate to get your hand on this laptop or maybe some other Apple product when it comes out. They reserve an amount of them and put them in stores that are not available. So you might think, well, it's back ordered for a month, so I'm not going to be able to get my hands on it. I placed that online order and now I wait. Well, you can cancel that online order if you need to, because you should check with your local store or maybe go to your local store. They often have stock. And one of the things I've heard is that 1 terabyte storage model with the 16 gigs of RAM is also something that has been cropping up in Apple stores.
That is a good tip. That's a really good tip. So
yeah, I
tell
picked
us
up
about...
a couple.
I
definitely picked up a couple of things first thing in the morning, and also like you just get there right as it opens, and you, oftentimes they have 3-4 of them of many things that are oftentimes sold out. They kind of seed those out. It's also useful to be I've learned over time that back when we were buying lots and lots of computers, that being a business user is useful. You should do it if you have a business. Sign up, build a relationship.
Yeah, because they have a business rep at the Apple Store, and they will talk to you, and they will reserve things for you and help you.
Exactly. They'll be like, hey,
it's quite nice.
Tomorrow would be great if you came in. It'd be great to visit here tomorrow.
I've got a bag with from when I got my last MacBook Pro. Well, when TWiT got the last MacBook Pro, there's still a bag that I have that has my name on like a label on the side. Whenever I walked in, they were like, "Oh, not only did they help me out, but they were also like, we had your shows on today," which was just a really kind of fun thing. But I'm curious, how do you approach, Jason, or how did you approach the review for this specific MacBook Air? And was it for you a comparison to that MacBook Pro that people seem to be kind of confused about that just came out? Or were you really looking at it as an iteration on the MacBook Air itself? Or did you answer some of those questions like, should I get this or should I get the MacBook Pro?
I think the most important context is to compare it to the MacBook Airs of old, not only the M1, which is sort of the last of that other era, but also of Intel MacBook Airs, because the truth is most people updating to this computer are not coming from an M1 Air. They're coming from an Intel MacBook Air probably. And so I tried to think about that. I got this. I was actually on vacation when this came in, which was weird because Apple is very secretive about sending you review units. And I had to be like, you need to send this to a condo that is a Verbo in San Diego. And I've never been there before, but here's the address and it should work. And it all worked fine. But I ended up with 2 MacBook Airs. I ended up with my MacBook Air and this MacBook Air. And so it was kind of great because I was on vacation. And so I had a laptop in the condo and I was checking email and writing stuff. And I was doing, whatever, like not working because I was on vacation. But I got to travel with it, which I thought was actually, that's good, right? Like that's a part of the point of doing a laptop. And then in my approach, the truth is what we learned about the M1 is true of the M2, which is these chips are what they are. And you can put them in different wrappers, and the performance, if you do benchmark testing, is largely identical because, an M1 Air and an M1 Mini and an M1 13-inch MacBook Pro and an M1 iMac, they're all the same. They all get the same scores, more or less. So I tried to focus on the MacBook Air experience and also think a little bit about coming from Intel. My wife has a 2018 Intel MacBook Air she probably won't have very much longer, and it is startling how much you forget if you've been living on an M1 MacBook Air for a while how slow in comparison those Intel MacBook Airs were. And that's just a function of the Apple Silicon transition more than anything else. And yeah, the M2 is faster than M1. There's no doubt about it. And the design is really nice. And having MagSafe come back, and not just because it's MagSafe and all the benefits of that, but having that extra port now. My M1 Air has that little dealie that you stick into the USB-C port that gives it fake MagSafe. And that's great, but that means I have one port. So having 2 usable ports is also a big part of this. But yeah, in the end, for me, it was mostly about what's the MacBook Air experience like, because I think that not only is it the most popular laptop, but that's the context most people are considering when they're buying this thing or thinking about buying it.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's kind of been one of the ongoing questions. I know Leo has talked a lot about how the sort of single core performance of all of the M1 series devices is very similar. The single core performance of these ones are likely to be very similar, and it's only in multi-core performance things. And so when you look at like the MacBook Air, which is this device that in theory is meant for browsing the web and doing some writing tasks and that kind of thing, then we don't necessarily look at that performance boost as part of it, which I think is part of the reason why, it doesn't have that active cooling system, right? But at the same time, I've seen folks talk about how they, threw a bunch of tasks at it, opened up a bunch of tabs, tried to do these little things. They couldn't get it to slow down. And it's fascinating to me what Apple Silicon has done in terms of changing the way that folks are kind of looking at these devices and trying to turn them into these productivity machines to an extra extent. I'm so confused, or not confused, but rather I'm so fascinated by how now they get a MacBook Air and they're trying to push it as hard as they can, even though this device maybe in years before was not meant that way. I mean, do we feel like that is because of the performance gains we've got from Apple Silicon itself, or is it just something that maybe I hadn't noticed before?
I mean, Andy can back me up on this. It's the bar being raised over time, right? Like it used to be like, oh, well, word processing. But as computers have advanced and in the power of Apple Silicon, that bar keeps getting raised. So now as a reviewer, I look at it and I say, you might not want to do 8K renders on this for an hour because it'll slow down. It'll still do it. It'll just be a little bit slower. And it's like 8K renders, right? Like the bar has been raised a lot over time. And the truth is 99.9% of people who buy the MacBook Air will never get it to throttle even. It will maybe get a little warm, maybe, and that's about it.
I think that our expectations grow. It's like a bag, our expectations will grow with no matter how fast you make the processor. We're going to go, well, it's pretty good. Like it could have done this better. It could have rendered 8K, or I could have been able to render, whatever those things are. But I will say that it's just incredible. Like these all the M1s. I mean, I'm not traveling as much, so I have a lot of the M1 minis. And I'm still taken aback by how fast they are, and that they just jumped so much forward. And then obviously the studio has been great as well. We've done some pretty extensive tests with the studio with video, and it's just, you just keep on adding more outputs, and you're like, it's going to slow down eventually.
Yeah,
maybe
that just points out what I agree absolutely with Jason's saying. I mean, when you're reviewing these things, it's hard to come up with a real world scenario in which you can say, "Oh, geez, that's too bad," because even stacked up next to like mid range, big like 8-fan helicopter cooling style Windows laptops, this thing is just thrashing in the benchmarks and another hands-on actual tests. But the thing is, like when you're the Apple's problem is that they don't charge. They're not really good at giving you a really, really great deal. Like if this were an $800 laptop, we could possibly be reviewing things in sense of, well, but you know what? What are you going to get? Let's not expect too much because this is an $800 laptop. These are great benchmarks. It is appropriate to see, well, let's see what it takes to really make these things suffer and scream. Because look, a lot of these people are spending $1,500, $2,000, $3,000 on a MacBook Air. And for that amount of money, even at the lower end, they have a right to expect like the best possible upgrade they could possibly get over whatever they were using before.
I think that's a great point, too. The idea that we could be cynical about the fact that this is $11.99 and that the last year's model, essentially the M1 Air, is still on the price list at $9.99. But I think the other way to view it, and Andy, you were kind of getting at it there, too, is that M1 MacBook Air is great, right? And like, although I wish that this M2 Air was $9.99, it's not for various reasons. I think they are going to need to get it there eventually. But I'm so glad that $9.99 price point is still there. And the fact is, Apple Silicon was such a leap that even if you end up, I think that it's a legitimate buy, a good buy to buy the M1 MacBook Air even today, if you are looking at the prices and going, oh, it's a little too rich for my blood, because at $9.99, that M1 Air is still going to do 99.9% of the jobs that you ever wanted as fast as you could possibly want them.
Yeah, another response with a lot of nines in it. I think that it's really, really important that Apple hold that line and make sure there's always a MacBook available for less than $1,000, even if it's $1 less, because that also means that education prices is probably going to be $100 less. And there's so many people for whom that $100 or that $200 difference between the M1 and the M2 is going to be the difference between having a Mac and having a Windows machine. And most of those people would probably rather have a Mac, wouldn't they?
What is it outside of the processor that brings this over that $9.99 price bump? What else did they do with the M2 over the M1 to really raise that price, do we think?
I think it's not the processor so much as it is the display is new. The webcam is upgraded. It's that notch display, it's not as good a display as this MacBook Pros that cost $2,000, but it's brighter and it's taller. And it's got the notch, but Apple's been very clever about hiding the menu bar and the notch. And I think that for most people, the menu bar being up there, it isn't that disruptive, and you get used to it, and it's fine. But it's a better display, it's a better webcam, it's a 1080 webcam. You've got MagSafe. This new design probably is a little more expensive than the old design too, in terms of the physical enclosure of it. I'm sure it's one of those things where they looked at the cost of making this right now and weren't comfortable taking it to $9.99 and thought, like I just said, that the M1 Air is actually pretty great. So why don't we keep selling it? But I do think that over time they need to push it down because, like Andy said, and it's the truth of it. It's the reality of it. There's a reason Apple tried to get rid of the MacBook Air a few years ago and replace it with the MacBook and the 13-inch MacBook Pro, both of which were $11.99 or $12.99, and they were Retina, and the MacBook Air wasn't, and people didn't care. They just kept buying the $9.99 laptop, and I think Apple's learned that lesson that for a lot of people, the $9.99 laptop is what they're going to buy, and that's it. Like you can try to sell me an $11.99 laptop, but there's a certain portion of the consumer base that's just going to say no. So that's why I think in the long run the M2 Air will need to get down there. And I know there's inflation and stuff like that, but like having that $99 price point, a lot of nines, like Andy said, I think is important. And I really wonder what they'll never say, but what the sales proportion will be between the M1 and the M2 over the next year, because I think they're still going to sell a lot of M1 Airs, and they should. It's a great computer.
I will say that Apple is starting to, it feels like there's a trajectory that looks a lot like the early 90s, where there are so many different chips and so many different computers that are being released, and they're all in different cadences that even for someone like me, I start going, I don't know what I want to buy. I think it was clear for a while, and I think it's starting to get murky. And I think that it's not murky yet, but I think that Apple has to start thinking about, the streamlining that a little bit. It probably has to do with supply chains and lots of other things of putting out what you can when you can, but with lots of different chipsets that are not as far apart, with lots of different outlays. It starts to get confusing. And it was not that didn't need to be, I don't know, 6 versions of the Mac when, they're almost identical in the early 90s. But I start feeling a little deja vu that we're starting to get a lot of different pieces of hardware at different levels of development, and it's starting to lead to, I think people I've talked to are starting to get like they're just hanging on and not buying anything right now because they're not sure what the next thing is for them, because it's just so many different options and there's so fine a detail between them that it really takes a lot of thought, and something that Apple's been good at not forcing us to do for a long time, but it seems to be getting harder.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break before we come back with more MacBreak Weekly with Andy Ihnatko, Alex Lindsay, and Jason Snell. I do want to tell you, though, about Nuvei, who are bringing you this episode of MacBreak Weekly. Nuvei is tomorrow's payment platform designed to accelerate your business. If your payment provider is holding your business back, well, Nuvei has next-generation payment technology that not only boosts conversions, reduces fraud, and increases approval rates, but it also works seamlessly with your existing tech stack. You can connect to Nuvei's platform via a single API integration, and with Nuvei's agile platform, your business will also be allowed to add new payment methods, enter more markets, and meet evolving customer demands, so that way you can stay ahead of the curve. See, Nuvei offers more than 550 alternative payment methods. That means cryptocurrencies, local payment solutions, and that's around the world in 150 currencies. It also offers local acquiring in 46 countries and more than 200 global markets. Customers also benefit from all payout options, card issuing, banking, and fraud management services. Nuvei can handle any high-demand peak event. Their always-on approach ensures 99.999% uptime. They offer flexible a la carte solutions that are tailored to your needs. Nuvei is the payment partner for some of the world's leading global brands, including Wix, Valve, DraftKings, General Motors, and many more. With future-proof technology and a dedicated team of 24/7, 365 human support professionals, Nuvei prepares your business for whatever comes next. Say goodbye to abandoned carts, poor approval rates, and high chargebacks with Nuvei, the platform fast-forwarding to the next generation of payments. Turn payments into powerful accelerators for your business at Nuvei.com. That's Nuvei.com. Nuvei, tomorrow's payment platform. And hey, you can have that today. Thanks so much to Nuvei for sponsoring this week's episode of MacBreak Weekly. Back from the break, and now let's talk about an interesting report. So first and foremost, we saw, I can't remember if it was Facebook or Google first, but one of those two companies, whether they said it themselves or it was leaked or however it went, those two companies announced that things were going to be slowing down, that they weren't going to be doing a lot of hiring, that they were going to be pulling back on spending, that was going to be a rough couple of years, et cetera, et cetera. And now, according to Bloomberg, Apple is joining that list of companies who are reportedly planning to slow down spending on, quote, some teams next year. The outward understanding of this is that the potential economic downturn is at the root of wanting to slow things down. But I have to ask, Jason, you've got charts on charts on charts that always seem to be showing Apple's money growing and growing and growing. Why does a company this big with this much money need to slow down hiring and change focus on his team? And I know you're not an economist by trade, but I am curious your thoughts on this.
Why do they? They don't. That's the thing. And in fact, I find it baffling when these stories come out, because Apple has always been the company that says you invest through a downturn. We have all the money. We have all the money in the bank. We make a huge amount of money. When everybody else is shrinking, that's when we put more money in, right? Because then when it turns back around, you're ahead. That's an investing thing. It's a business thing. And I think Apple mostly does that. So I look at this and I think, one, maybe this is a message Apple's trying to send to Wall Street, which is we're taking it seriously, and we are concerned that this is going to be an issue. And I also, anything that's an important category for Apple, they are absolutely not doing this, right? Like anything that's important, they're not doing this. So what is it? My gut feeling is it's either an excuse to cut in places or reduce through attrition, places where they are not, that particularly enthusiastic, or they think there are too many people, or it's just, I mean, I don't even know. I find it ridiculous to suppose that Apple somehow needs to limit its hiring in certain areas because it's worried about unless they are worried about a decades-long depression or something like that. Like, they got all the money, they're going to come out of this. The last thing they want to do is reduce the amount of fuel going to the engine. So I'm skeptical that this is not something that is not what it appears to be, if that makes sense, like in some sort of ulterior motive, whether it's external or internal.
I think that Apple's still run by folks that came from from a downturn. I think that there's a PTSD that exists at Apple related to the 90s that they have never really gotten out of, and I think that they, I think that anytime they see any issue at all, I think that they go, oh, well, we're gonna have to pull back, a little bit. And they've made these announcements in the past. I think that we're talking about them, they're still talking about not even necessarily cutting jobs, but simply slowing down. And I think that they, right. I think they very quickly get to prioritize, like, we're just going to prioritize what matters. And I think Apple's better at this than most companies, which is we're just going to prioritize the things that make money for the next. And that's kind of their signal, like, that we're going to focus on those things. And, and again, I think that if any company, they are the worst case scenario, a lot of things of, how bad can this be and what can it look like? And I think that they will tend to pull back faster than almost anyone else as far as wanting to be careful, because again, I think it comes from the 90s. It literally isn't something that's right now. You have still people making decisions who lived through something that was pretty harrowing, and if they see anything that they might want to start hedging for, they'd rather hedge very slowly than hedge hard.
Yeah, this is probably similar to what the news came out from Google last week. The Google news was a little bit more precise because it came in the form of an actual company-wide email that Sundar Pichai sent out that said that no, we're not going to be firing people. As a matter of fact, we just finished a huge round of our usual snapping up people who just graduated from college, but we're going to be slowing down hiring for the rest of the year, and but the specifically slightly chilling news for people who might be working on, I don't know, Google like balloon internet projects, was that we might be we're going to be refocusing attention on things that are kind of key things, and maybe consolidating certain groups together. And so I think that something similar, but maybe a little less dramatic, is going on in Apple. They didn't become a $2 trillion company by saying, you know what, we don't have any need for these 800 people that we're thinking of hiring. We don't know what we're going to do with them, and we're in the middle of economic downturn. But what the hell? We're Apple. We can hire as many people as we want. So yeah, this is not going to affect the AR headset. This is not going to affect the Mac Pro. This is not going to affect anything that was already on the rails ready to go. The indirect news that we got specifically said that this is not going to affect any shipments or any projects that are already on the rails and ready to go.
For a company that will throw millions of dollars at a car project that may never see the light of day, it is something Alex said is absolutely true. I don't know how much of it is the PTSD from the 90s, but I will say there is that. And also, I think there is a general frugality and a carefulness when hiring that comes from that era that still exists. And it is, again, a company that can spend all this money on this car project that may never work, just as one example. And yet there are places within Apple where you would be surprised at how cheap they are, and how reluctant they are to spend money. And I always found that weird, but I guess the argument there is if you let that go, it will get out of control like it did at Apple in the 90s, where it literally, they were bankrupting themselves because they said yes to everything. Yeah.
And they gave away a lot of computers that would just forget about them.
Yeah.
Like there was a lot of, we had Lucasfilm, I think we had a bunch of computers that they would drop off and say, okay, it's great. And I don't think that there was no paperwork for them. It was like, it was just there, And so I think that there was definitely, after Steve came back, there was definitely a tightening, a dramatic tightening that happened.
Yeah. And sometimes they can shoot themselves in the foot with frugality. How many times have we been kind of surprised by the fact that why is this bug still here, or why has this seemingly important part of macOS or iOS haven't been fixed, or this feature hasn't been added? So, because we don't have enough people on staff. Why don't we have people on staff? Well, because we pulled people off of those teams to put them on this other team because another team was behind. And this is where most of us would shrug and think and say, you're a $2 trillion company. Hire more people. If you've had it proven to yourself that that deadlines are in jeopardy because you don't have enough people working on the project, hire more people for the project. Don't make it that much later to fix this part of the UI that's been driving everybody nuts for the past two releases.
I guess ultimately this, made me a little nervous because all of these companies are preparing for the potential economic downturn. So I guess now's a good time to mention Club Twit, twit.tv/Club where you can support these shows directly to make sure that they continue to come out even in times of economic uncertainty. And we appreciate all of you who are members of Club Twit who are helping to support the shows. Up next, let's talk about an interesting new lawsuit that has hit. This is an interesting one because of the people who are involved. So Apple has faced some scrutiny in the past over Apple Pay and the use of the NFC chip inside of the iPhone. In the very first iteration, when the NFC chip got added for the purpose of using Apple Pay, there was lots of griping about the fact that no one was able to use the NFC scanning technology in the iPhone except for Apple through the use of Apple Pay. And then it kind of grew from there, where there are now companies who are saying that Apple essentially holds a monopoly on iPhone and other platforms because you have to use Apple Pay instead of being able to sort of directly integrate with a specific payment system. And now in the United States, a law group, I guess, that has actually been responsible for 2 other antitrust cases brought against Apple. That one is bringing a case against Apple in relation to Apple Pay. It's a class action suit that was struck up by a company, and I'm losing it, but I think it was a company in Iowa, was it? Yeah. Thank you. Affinity Credit Union. Yeah, and now we're looking at this case, and I of course would love to hear your folks' thoughts on this, and sort of when I think of Apple Pay and I think of the benefits I get from Apple Pay as a user, I am very happy with the security of it and the convenience of it. But I'm sure as a provider of payments, having to pay those fees is not something people much like to do, or companies much like to do.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see if Apple just basically cuts a deal to make this go away. They recently had, I can't remember how recently it was, but fairly recently, they decided to just write a check for $100 million to settle a similar suit with developers, a similar class action antitrust suit. I think they're also facing new action from the British on similar antitrust actions on these fees. I really think that there are only 2 real antitrust pain points that or vulnerabilities, thermal exhaust ports, so to speak, on the Apple spaceship, and it really is exclusivity over the App Store and exclusivity over payments and transactions. Those are the only places where Apple seems to be vulnerable, and they do seem to be more vulnerable on the second than on the first, because for many international guidelines on how you prove antitrust, Apple basically saying that, nope, we have our own payment platform. Nope, we're going to give our own payment platform hardware level priorities over every other competing platform. Yes, there are 2 or 3 or 4 competing payment systems that are out there. We are not going to let them have the same kind of power and the same kind of simplicity that ours have. You're never going to be able to get Samsung Pay on your Apple Watch, and I think that most people would agree who've used both all of these things that that's not a bad thing that you're keeping Samsung Pay off the Apple Watch, but a court might have different ideas for it, and an antitrust, if they can just simply write a check, be done with it, and be ready to fight the really big wars that are coming up very, very soon from the actual government actions, then that's probably the smart thing for them to do at this point.
You know, Apple is good at a few things. Apple is good at making lots of money, and Apple is also good at focusing on customer experience. And there are times when those two things are in opposition, and there are times when those two things are perfectly aligned. And this is a case where they're perfectly aligned, where if they had come up with an NFC payment system and it was an open API and every app was different and you had to launch a specific app in order to pay and all of that, it would have been a worse user experience. I really believe unifying it under Apple Pay was the right decision. But also, a side effect of that decision is that Apple is saying, well, we built this feature, financial institutions, and now you need to cut us in for some of that money because that's why we built this feature. And like, it's funny because it's anti-competitive sort of in a way, but really what we're talking about is financial institutions who benefit from the frictionless aspect of contactless payments, cutting in the company that builds the hardware and built the software to make it as frictionless as possible. And I kind of don't have a lot of sympathy for them, but I have a little. Like, I understand it, and having it be open and letting them do what they want, like, I get why they want that, and yet at the same time, if they had gotten that, it would be worse. And that's the struggle I have with a lot of this, is sometimes the user experience is degraded because Apple wants to make money, and that's things like not letting you buy Kindle books inside iOS, but buying iBooks, and you know that is bad. And the reason it happens is because Apple wants to skim your credit card transactions for things bought on iOS that are digital. I get it. I'm kind of opposed to it, but it is what it is. But in this case, like, Apple Pay is good. It's really good, and it would not be as good if I had to have a bunch of janky bank apps on my device instead of just putting my code numbers, my credit card numbers in the Apple Wallet setup and then forgetting about it.
Yeah, and I think that what starts out as freedom ends up being, we end up as users being leveraged. So what'll happen is it'll start opening up, and then people will only want to let us use those things instead of using the Apple one because they don't like to make the payments or whatever. So as a user, we're going to end up on the tail end of this, and this is a fight of, these are rich banks asking for more money from a very rich company, and the user experience will be degraded when this happens. I'm not, and the EU will do whatever, because the EU doesn't care about American companies. And so the EU will do whatever it's going to do. But this is a bunch of rich people asking for money from a company that's bigger than them, but they want more of their little cut. And what it's going to mean eventually, this is the same with the App Store, the same with this, is that users will be forced to use certain things because they don't want to use that other thing, and so we will be, it starts out looking like choice, but when there's not consumers in the lawsuit, just know that eventually we're going to get it in the back.
Well, I disagree with a lot of that, but we're not going to get into that right now. Mostly I want to bring up that part of the problem is not just simply there's the correct observation that these are the very, very wealthy banking industry is taking on the very, very wealthy Apple. But part of it is that you also have to ask yourself, we also have to ask ourselves as part of this conversation, what alternative payment systems that are better, that could be better than Apple Pay, are never going to make it out of the cradle, because there is no point. There's not going to be investment in it, because the first question they're going to have is, how are you going to make this easier to use than Apple Pay? How are you going to get availability on the Apple Watch? And you will have no answer for that, because Apple just simply has said the Apple Pay is the way that this is going to go. We have more than half of the phones in the United States of America. We have a huge tick of the phones worldwide. if we make this decision, then suddenly this becomes a very, very impossible proposition. And I do think that Apple could, if Apple had no choice in the matter, if there were existing laws on the books, we don't have to discuss whether it's a good idea for these laws, for such a law to exist or not. But let's say that it was like absolutely illegal for them to lock in Apple Watch users to just Apple Pay. I'm sure they could come up with an API that would that every bank would absolutely support. If it meant that you don't have to pop up an app in order to do it, you just simply, just like you can set the default browser, just like you can set a default email client, you can set a default tap to pay system. I'm sure they would make that happen if they had an alternative, if they had no alternative but to support other systems. And that's why I'm always very open to discussion of, well, if Apple wants to claim that what they're doing is not anti-competitive, that's great. We'd love to hear it in front of a court of law where other people who are not necessarily emotionally or financially invested in Apple get to decide whether Apple is making a good case or not. They should at least be forced to make that argument and not just simply say, hey, we're Apple, two hippies in a garage. We're all about user experience. We love everybody. We're the best.
Well, and
so you think they
won't?
Do you feel like they're not? It sounds like this lawsuit's happening, so they will have to do this, right? Andy,
I think they're going to look for. Well, this kind of a lawsuit is going to basically end up in some sort of a settlement. I don't see it going so far that if the government were in a position to basically make this ruling, they would much rather do it themselves. Congress would much rather make this sort of a ruling themselves as part of a large package they would like to make after the midterms. But yeah, you're right. That is a risk that if Apple lets this go to a certain extent, they could have a ruling on their hands that will cost them a lot more than whatever check they would have to write to just make this group of banks and investment companies happy and make them go away.
I think that the issue really is that, I'd be surprised if more than 5% of Apple users want anything different. I just don't think it's there. And so the issue is that if the hard part will be, for Congress or someone else to do something is that, there's not a lot of voters out there interested. So it really comes down to who's paying for it.
I really like how when I go into San Francisco around when there's like an event or something, and everybody, there are lots of street vendors, you see lots of folks, and then you go into some coffee shops and stuff, and everybody's offering 9 different options. They've got a tag you can scan for paying with Square's Cash App. They've got a tag you can scan for paying via PayPal. They've got one for Venmo. They've got their tag on the side of the thing. They've got, some of them have crypto. All there are so many different payment platforms out there, and a lot of them are just making all of them available for use. I'm kind of curious what ends up being the main solution that a lot of people use. I think it's more varied than maybe we realize, because when it comes to individuals or small companies versus these big companies, of course, like a grocery store that's a grocery store chain can afford the infrastructure required to set up Apple Pay and all those sort of tap-to-pay terminals. But these smaller businesses that don't want to spend, X amount of dollars a month to be able to go through Square or one of those other Toast or one of those are just offering payments in different ways. And yes, it results in some paperwork on their end, but it's interesting to see
they also have those options. They have to look at whether they're supporting, from an Apple perspective, from an Apple user perspective, I just know which vendors support Apple Pay. And if they don't, then I don't go there very often. So the thing is, because I don't really use cash anymore, and I don't really like pulling my credit card out. And so pretty much everything is all, and I think that is, probably will still be the case for quite some time from an Apple user's perspective. Not necessarily. Yeah. I mean, they can have a lot of other things, but I think most of them will have Apple Pay, mostly because Apple users tend to spend more money.
Yeah. Well, just as we're used to seeing the stickers on the windows of the store that you used to say, hey, we accept MasterCard, Visa, and American Express, and gee, how come they're always printed on the same sticker? It's almost as if there's no chance that they will only accept one instead of 3. Now that sticker is, hey, we accept Apple Pay, Google Pay, and Samsung Pay. So I honestly have no idea when I tap my Android phone or tap a watch what I know I don't have to know or care what processing system the thing is using. It would be more interesting if I could just as my internet connection interface here, it basically says here's the order in which I would like you to try to connect to the internet. If there's Ethernet boom, go Ethernet. If there's Wi-Fi, try this Wi-Fi access point first, this one second. At the end of the list, try my Wi-Fi hotspot. It would be nice if, in an ideal world, I would love to have multiple payment systems on my phone that could basically make that negotiation on myself, saying, primarily, I like this payment app because I know that it automatically adds more money to independent businesses than it would to other businesses, or for whatever reason. And I just simply tap, and it actually works. But as pie in the sky as these things go, realize that I am very hippie in a lot of my pronunciations here. But I'm also aware of like what the world was like when the court said, you know what, it's bad that AT&T has a monopoly on long distance. We should open up the long distance business to everybody. And now all of a sudden you have to basically navigate, how am I paying for the long distance? How many minutes am I getting? And how did I suddenly get switched from this plan to this other plan without actually doing anything? It could wind up being a hellscape, but you know what? Maybe life is meant to be a hellscape anyway, and we're just meant to figure out how to survive it.
Oh boy! Speaking of hellscapes, Russia.
I'm sorry, it's really hot. Okay.
Russia is fining Apple now, joining in fining Apple for antitrust laws, for violating antitrust laws. And what's interesting about this is it was, I think a couple of weeks ago, I saw that Russia was planning on fining Apple because Apple was going to continue to not store data inside of Russia, but instead was storing data outside of Russia. And Russia said, if you don't start storing it here in Russia, then we're going to start fining you. And now the country has come forth with some antitrust concerns. It says, and I quote, "The company has abused its dominant position in the iOS app distribution market. Apple prohibits iOS app developers from telling clients inside the app about the possibility of paying for purchases outside the App Store or using alternative payment methods." So this is, essentially at the heart of this is the long ongoing discussion about Apple and its payment platforms. And Jason, you had mentioned earlier that the way that it kind of is affects users in the Kindle app, for one example. But there, of course, is the argument that this is a larger concern, but Russia seems to be doing this after some other attempts at fining Apple for many different things. So this is only the latest in a long run, it seems.
Isn't it so sweet? Russia wants to get in on the antitrust stuff. I have a hard time not viewing this as a way for Russia to see if Apple has some accounts that are in Russia that it was mandated to have for sales that were going on in Russia that it might be able to fine and get access to. Because I got to be honest, I'm not sure Apple or most Western companies are counting on Russia being a market for them in the near future. And so, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like Apple's so intertwined with China. There are lots of markets that Apple is not going to say goodbye to. But Russia as a market at this point, I think, is not in that category. And Apple has paused its sales there. And I think that I look at this and I think, well, why would Apple care or pay them or do anything if they're essentially turning their back on Russia? And I think maybe the answer is maybe there's a bank account somewhere that's got rubles in it that Russia can just wrest back from them and take that money back. And that sounds like them. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's only going to get tighter. They just fined Google something like $230 million. Sorry, I'm looking up right now. $360 million, the equivalent of for failing to censor Ukrainian content and not basically making sure that Russian users only get the party line in terms of how that war is going. So yeah, I think if Russia were giving Apple monster numbers instead of being something, what is it, like 4%, something 5%, very, very small amount of how much money Apple's making, they're not making an argument that this is a relationship that Apple wants to bend over backwards in order to make these people happy, considering how much it's going to cost them to make them happy.
All right, folks, let's take a quick break away from the legal stuff and also from the show for just a moment so I can tell you about our next sponsor, New Relic, who are bringing you this episode of MacBreak Weekly. A lot of devs, and a lot of devs out there are incredibly curious people. and they're often the first to explore the newest tech. They dig into documentation. They're the folks who don't only want to know how things work, but want to know why they work the way that they do. And that is why so many engineers turn to New Relic, because New Relic gives you data about what you build and shows what's really happening in your software lifecycle. It is a single place to see the data from your entire stack, so you don't have to look into those 16 different tools and make those connections manually. New Relic pinpoints issues down to the line of code, so you know why the problems are happening, and then that gives you the power to resolve them quickly. That's why dev and ops teams at DoorDash, at GitHub, at Epic Games, and more than 14,000 other companies use New Relic to debug and improve their software. When teams come together around data, it allows you to triage problems, be confident in decisions, and reduce the time needed to implement resolutions using data, not opinions. Use the data platform made for the curious. Right now, you can get access to the whole New Relic platform, and you get 100 gigabytes of data per month free forever with no credit card required. I feel like I need to read that again because this is, wow. You get access to the whole New Relic platform and 100 gigs of data per month free forever without even having to type in your credit card. Sign up at newrelic.com/MacBreak. That's NEWRELIC.com/MacBreak. newrelic.com/MacBreak. Thank you so much, New Relic, for sponsoring this week's episode of MacBreak Weekly. All right, we are back to the show, and I wanted to kick things off for this segment talking about Apple Arcade. Check in on Apple Arcade. So one of the things that we just saw at, I think it was at WWDC, Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference, was a conversation around gaming on the Mac. And Apple is sometimes accused of, I don't even know if it's an accusation, maybe observed as being the company that is the mobile game platform. But I think that there then is the criticism that Apple is not the sort of PC gaming company. And I felt like what they had talked about at that Mac event, well, in part that Mac event, was that it is working on making, Mac OS itself, as well as the hardware behind Mac OS, powerful and capable enough to run some of these AAA games that we see out there. But while all of that is going on, we do have to, again, recognize Apple as a platform or as a mobile gaming company. And one of the places that exists is Apple Arcade. And, I'll check in from time to time on Apple Arcade. But now there's a list of games that will be leaving Apple Arcade soon. We sometimes see this on Netflix and Hulu, where there are some deals that have gone through, and so those apps will, or those shows will leave. And now the same thing is happening in Apple Arcade. So I just wanted to check in with you fellas if any of you play any games from Apple Arcade or use Apple Arcade, and I'm curious about your thoughts on sort of the future of Apple Arcade, if this is going to continue to be something that Apple really digs into or not.
Yeah, I only use Apple Arcade sporadically. I use it as I use it for snacking, so to speak. Well, because I think what it's really, really good at is finding those little games that aren't going to take up your brain for 3 weeks. It's going to be a good thing. It's going to be a good time for a few hours, and then maybe you'll dip into it again the next day. And more than anything else, that's not going to be filled with pop-up ads. It's not going to be where you bring you steer your cart around the course once, and then at the end of the first lap it says, "Congratulations! Now, hey, why don't you improve your cart with a new engine and new racing stripes, and how about a new hat?" So that's pretty much what I'm using it for. I'm so glad that they are starting to let people know that, hey, these games are certain games are about to expire and about to leave the store, because it does let you know that it does give a sense of urgency to make sure that that the Apple Arcade library is a living, breathing creature. It's going to be changing with things coming and going as you go. And I have to admit that I'm looking at the list right now. I don't recognize any of these games, but if it gives attention to this list of like 10 or 20 games and makes people discover them simply by the fact that, look, if you don't know what you got until it's gone, you may as well give Dread Nautical or Don't Bug Me a try. I think it's a really good thing, an important part of the consumer experience.
I have to admit, the only two we play a little Apple Arcade, and then we also I have an Atari, one of those Ataris that has all the games built into it. There was some point the other night I was playing some Space Invaders, and I was like, Apple should just buy Atari. It's like $400 million. Just buy the whole thing and just stick all those games on there. Then I'd play a lot more on Apple Arcade. And then you could update them all, like have like a click the 2025 version versus the original version, and probably do really well. I think that, I don't know if people have a strong expectation of Apple, the Apple Arcade stuff. And I don't know, it seems like that's going to be there's a lot of momentum to play AAA games on a PC and on desktop boxes and so on and so forth. I think Apple is doing pretty well with kind of more of the casual gaming. I think that one of the things that they're really missing is they're really crushing it with casual gaming, and I think that they can continue to do that. I think that they do need, if they really want this to turn out, they need a breakout game. They need a game that everyone's playing, and I think that could be done, but it would take a lot of decisiveness that I don't know if they, have to do that. But building some great game that people have to be part of, and what is Apple's Fortnite, so to speak. And I think that there are opportunities there, but you'd have to kind of start throwing some pretty hard numbers at something to make it to make that work.
I think Apple's done pretty well with Apple Arcade so far. Most impressively, perhaps, is that they seem to have recalibrated, right? There's that sign of like, does Apple just push something out onto the ice floe and then walk away and hope that it doesn't sink? And that the initial launch was interesting, and they tried to build up a catalog. And then at some point they realized, what we really need to do is we need to have some exclusive games, and then we also are going to put some money toward taking things that are in the App Store and pulling them in a free for Apple Arcade members version that doesn't charge. And then we're also going to go to some of the classic games that people remember playing on their iPhones that have kind of fallen out of off the App Store. Their tech is a little bit old, and the developer doesn't have a reason to update them. And we're going to basically pay them to pull those into Apple Arcade and get them up and running on the latest versions of iOS. And that is a much better approach. I think they've been successful with it. They brought back a lot of people's favorite games from the past, and you can play them now again on your iPhone. I think it's such a great idea. Yeah. And there are, as for my personal use, I go on and off with Apple Arcade. There are games that come on and I play them, and then like the Alto's Adventure and Alto's Odyssey series, they did revisited versions of those games with extra levels, and it got me back into that. I play Flip Flop Solitaire from Zach Gage. There are a bunch of games that I do play that are Apple Arcade games in some form, often classic games that have been brought in. I think the truth of these games is probably that they don't get a lot of use, and Apple is cutting games that are not played a lot from its catalog. That's my guess. My understanding is that there's some compensation you get from Apple for having your game on Apple Arcade, and then you're compensated more based on, I think it's time of use. The amount of time that Apple Arcade subscribers spend in a game actually factors in to what they get paid. But, and maybe different contracts are different. But my guess is that they're cutting from here, and I hate that experience on any subscription service where there's a game or a show or a movie or whatever that you expect to see and it just vanishes. I think it's really frustrating, and I just am opposed to it generally. But that's probably what's going on here. And when I saw the list, I thought, well, yeah, like I would be more upset if it was a list of like things that they had promoted that were like big deals that were reasons for you to get Apple Arcade. And that's not what it is. It's more like again, I kind of admire them really seeming to be pretty active on sort of defining what the rules are for Apple Arcade and changing what the selection is and trying to find a sweet spot there, and I hope they keep doing it.
Yeah, it's a very safe spot to let your kids loose on, where that it's an all-you-can-eat buffet. You're not going to be letting them rack up $1,000 worth of in-app purchases and in-game purchases, and that they are up to a certain level, and that they at some point some human being at Apple has said that okay, we believe that this game is not going to result in a press release in a news story that we're going to have to react to at some point in the future. So it's very possible that the role of Apple Arcade is not simply to give Apple a bigger slice of the gaming pie, but simply to keep people inside the Apple ecosystem in a way in which Apple can deliver something that customer wants.
It's an important part of your nutritious Apple bundle as well, right?
Yes.
Like, I mean, as a $5 a month thing, if you use it a lot, great. If you don't, there's that question of like, should I be paying for this? But, you know, I converted to the Apple One bundle because I was buying iCloud and all these other things, and you roll it together. And there's something freeing almost about saying, like, I don't need to be constantly interrogating Apple or Apple Arcade or Apple News or anything else and be like, am I using you? Because it's like, well, it's almost free at this point, right? It's almost like, well, I'm getting it for all these other reasons. It's free, and now I can look on there and play the games too. And that's, you know, not everything in the bundle has to be like the 100%, we got to use it, it's a must-have. Sometimes it is that just kind of accretion that happens where you throw a bunch of stuff into the bundle and you realize, I'm glad it's there even if I don't use it every day.
Yeah. I got to say though that I also converted to a bundle, and it does bother me a little bit that if I could pay the exact same amount of money and have these things individually, I'm not sure how strongly each one of them would pass that smell test of, do I like Apple News enough to actually subscribe to it? Not really.
Definitely not.
Do I like iCloud enough? Not really. Do I like Apple Arcade enough? Not really. But if I can get a bundle so I can back up my I can back up my iPad and my iPhone without having to actually interact with this at all. If I can occasionally use Apple News to read things that are behind paywalls on other news reader apps.
The Wall Street Journal,
on and on and on. I just wish that they were, because alternatively, like, I love Google Photos, and I pay for unlimited on Google Photos because it really works great for me, and I love Dropbox, and I love other cloud storage systems, and I love certain other newsreader apps, and there are things that I pay for because I love them and I want this to keep going and I want to keep getting them. I just wish I felt that way about all these Apple services.
But I think a lot of times there's an inertia to it as well, though, because it's kind of like, Apple News wasn't that good, but now I find myself in it most of the time. You know, like it was one of those things. Like I was like, it's okay. It drives me crazy that it constantly, if I block something, it constantly tells me this was blocked. You know, like, and I'm just like, okay, well, when I blocked it, I didn't want to look at it anymore. That's my biggest complaint about it. But I think that it is this inertia, and a lot of memberships, that's kind of the deal, is you try to build it up to a point where the sum is bigger than whatever you were going to make a decision about. I do think as long as we don't lose cricket through the ages, you know, that's the, if they start taking that off, then I'm going to be like, I don't know if I can keep on doing this arcade.
That's the idea that you're not making three separate $5 decisions about, like, or $5 or $10 about Apple News and Apple TV Plus and Apple Arcade, but instead it's just part of the bundle. It is sort of freeing in the way of like, well, did I watch For All Mankind? Yes, I did. So that's good. And then this other month, did I play Alto's Odyssey? Yes, I did. So that's good. And was there that big feature story in the Wall Street Journal that somebody linked to and I don't pay for it, but it was in Apple News? By the way, that's pro tip. Right. If there's a Wall Street Journal article that you want to read, you just search for the headline in Apple News if you've got News Plus, and it's there. It's amazing. Yeah. Like it doesn't. I don't want to be making monthly decisions about if I'm using those features, right? Like I just don't want to do it. And that's the brilliance of throwing a bunch of different things in the bundles, is they only have to be kind of like occasionally helpful as long as you're getting enough out of it for it to be worth it. And that's what the game is that they're playing there.
Yeah. There's a good reason why Slayer and Night Ranger and a couple other metal bands from the 80s, they always tour together. They don't tour separately.
That's right.
Because
that's why we have county fairs.
I'll spend, you know.
That's why county fairs exist. Come on.
As a package, okay, $40, but I don't know if I want.
Yeah, it's the Lollapalooza retro bundle. Sorry, that's a different decade, I know, but we're just talking about concerts and it's the county fair. So what you're saying is Apple One is the county fair of technology bundles. It's very good.
I think that we should end this before we get insulted. Okay, which one is the Night Ranger? Which of the Apple services is Sig Sputnik? Which one?
Did you see that Apple's paying $50 million for the Butterfly keyboard?
I wouldn't pay a dime for it.
Right,
amen,
brother.
Yeah, exactly.
So Apple is going to pay $50 million in the settlement over the MacBook Butterfly keyboard lawsuit. So, of course, this was a lawsuit that was
Does this mean we all get $1?
Lawsuit.
It's like we get
Right.
$1.83 in the mail.
This is we always complain about, oh, well, great, we're going to get a check for $1.25. It's actually like, if the more you suffer, the more times you had to take that damn thing back, the more you're going to get. Like, you're going to get, I think the top thing is like $430 if you had to take it back 2 or 3 times. If you only had to take it back once, you get $150. And yeah, I mean, I think that if anything could have, we already had a big neon sign of failure on the Butterfly keyboard, simply by virtue of the fact that Apple just quietly said, yeah, we decided not to have that on any of the new Apples anymore. but when we're like, okay, you know what, you kind of got us. We will hand some checks to the people that we made suffer, because let's not like let this die in legend, that there are people that like things just kept breaking and breaking and breaking. They had keycaps replaced, they had entire keyboards replaced time and time again. Apple stuck to their guns for like 3 iterations of this thing after it was. I mean, I was early on the bandwagon, but most of my complaints were that I just thought the keyboard sucked. It just sucked as something to type on. But then we also found out that, yeah, but unfortunately, if you are operating it inside Earth's atmosphere, particles of that atmosphere will get underneath the keys and destroy it. And that was probably not something that came up in testing. If not, I hope they didn't release it based on that.
Andy, I'm not sure that crumbs are a vital part of Earth's atmosphere, but yes, your point is well taken. It's a bad keyboard that also didn't work right. So great.
Yeah. I just, it was one of those things
dust.
like, I kept on thinking that I was like, oh, this looks really cool. And I just found that I didn't type on it very much. Like, it was always like, oh, I got to go to another computer. And then there was some point about a month or 2 in, I was like, wow, this keyboard really stinks. You know, like I didn't have the same experience that Andy had. It was kind of like one of those things. Like, I just found myself finding other places to go to type other than my laptop.
Yeah, and part of the reason that this case is making that it's made it this far is because, and I think this is a fair point, not only did the keyboards, they seemed rather defective in the first place because so many of them got this issue, but when you took it in to get it repaired, then they put in the same keyboard, obviously, as they would, and then it would continue to be an issue. The next time some dust got under there and it wasn't working, or the key got a little sticky. So the argument is not only that these felt rather defective in the first place and that the design was kind of crummy in long-term use. There was a pun that I did not intend. But that over time, even if you paid to get it fixed with that, $150, $200, $125 replacement, it would then replace it with a keyboard that was the same thing that would then happen again. So, yeah, I get where that concern comes from, or the ongoing concern at least.
Yeah, it actually got me kind of angry because it was just such a stupid design decision. Because I didn't get super angry about deleting the headphone jack from the phones because I thought it was anti-consumer, but there was a practical engineering reason why that was a good idea. There are benefits to not having a headphone jack inside the iPhone, and they could legitimately say, look, there's every square millimeter of space inside this case is precious real estate. We just don't even want to have the space to use that space for something that we don't think anybody's going to miss. But for that to have a keyboard with, what was it, less than 0.52 millimeters of key travel on a MacBook that was not really thinner than anything else that Apple had ever made, that made it a stupid just design choice, as opposed to a way of making it thinner, a way of making it more comfortable, making it more practical. No, somebody, we're not going to name who, but he just lost his contract with Apple, or ended his relationship with Apple, decided that, the idea that these keys are sitting too proud from the surface of the MacBook, that offends me in a way that I can hardly contain. We must have flat keys. And after he was talked off of the idea of, what if we just had a flat pane of glass with etched glass hinting at where the keys should be struck. They were saying, well, they negotiated down to about half a millimeter, and then he made forward. That's what gets me annoyed. When make a stupid design decision just for aesthetics, just for style. This is what we spent half of our lifetimes defending Apple haters about, that they're just like cute design. They don't really care about performance because here you kind of got us. This was a stupid design based on just style.
Well, I think it's worse than that, though, because I think that there was a reason they designed this keyboard, which was for the 12-inch MacBook, which was super thin, and they felt like they needed a thinner keyboard, so they designed it for that.
Right.
The problem is that Apple has this pride of invention and also like this idea of they want to, for lots of good reasons, they want to recycle their stuff. So you see this to this day, right? It's like, the new feature that continuity camera in the next version of macOS has center stage in it, and it has portrait mode in it, because they already made those things, so we'll recycle them. But somebody somewhere made the fatal decision to say, this MacBook keyboard that we made because we needed it super thin, let's just use it everywhere. Sure, what could be the problem with that? And it wasn't a good keyboard on the MacBook either, but to subject every other laptop user to a keyboard that was essentially just designed for the skinniest of all their laptops. And then on top of all that, it turns out that it's actually not resilient in terms of real environments that are not a white room with nothing in it. A featureless white room, I don't know who would live in that room. Probably somebody whose contract just ended with Apple. So anyway, here we are. At least the keyboards are better now. But I mean, should Apple pay people for the butterfly keyboard angst that they went through? Yeah, they should. They should spend money on that. They should. That's a great great lawsuit for them to settle. It's like, this was really bad.
Tim Cook should have to sit at his desk just like Nathan in The Jerk, writing out Mr. John Camillahuddy, $400.12.
He has to type it on a butterfly keyboard. And every time it does a double E, he has to backspace, like, 2 E's again, and then do it again. That's the punishment for that.
Maybe that's why they finally added mail merge to Pages, because now you realize he's going to have to hook up his PFS file to the word processor.
That's exactly why they added mail merge. Oh my God, you figured it out.
Hey, remember when we talked about the butterfly keyboard every week? Oh, old times. It's so good. Just a little nostalgia shot here.
That's exactly what it was. Oh, boy. Well, anyway, it's gone. Thank goodness. Goodbye to you forever. And now they're paying for it in more ways than one. One other quick little story before we take another break. I did see there's a Wall Street Journal article. It is tied behind a paywall, but I've seen some other conversation about this. And I was curious.
News Plus.
There you go. News Plus.
Mikah.
Yes. So there's talk of SIM cards, these very silly things, going away in hopes that the eSIM, which is very popular in other countries, sort of takes over. And one thing I didn't realize is that the iPhone 13 was shipped without a SIM installed. And I guess that's the first model where that happened. And I have used a SIM card, an actual physical SIM card in the past. And at some point there was the offer to turn it into an eSIM, and I did that. And it was a whole horrible nightmare mess where for a while I didn't have my phone number, the phone number I've had for years, and thought it was going to be this whole thing. And it ended up getting fixed, thank goodness, and it was all okay. And now I'm eSIM and everything's fine. But for people who have used a SIM and then tried to make a change to an eSIM who've had the same experience as I have, I can understand a hesitancy on having the SIM card go away. But if I throw aside all of my experience and I just think about the fact that we have this little plastic and metal thing that we stick into our phones to make it work, whenever all it is telling the phone things that we could just have the phone know in the first place, that's bizarre to me. Like, who invented the SIM card in the first place? Why did we ever do this instead of just having it all built into the phone? I don't know. What are your thoughts on SIM cards, folks?
Well, there's big advantages to
retro.
having. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, talk about retro. We're talking about SIM cards now. Yeah, my daughter is in Europe for a month doing a summer program, and we set her up with an eSIM, and it's the first time I've actually ever used that, and it was super convenient. My concern, and this is not a general concern, but like my concern about it is what you said, Mikah, which is there is something that feels very safe about putting that piece of plastic in a different phone and knowing that your phone identity is essentially transferred. And if you can assure me that moving from phone A to phone B is a very smooth process and that I'm not going to get a phone call from my carrier or that my phone number is not going to transfer properly and I end up having to wait on hold on an 800 number, then let's do it. Let's go all the way with eSIM. But that's my fear. And as somebody who reviews phones, I am transferring that SIM card all the time. And it's so, that's why I haven't switched to an eSIM, is because it's so convenient to just pop it in another phone. And now my phone number is over there. And I am a little worried. And I know that that's an edge case, but I'm a little worried about that, putting myself in the hands of my carrier to trust that this transfer has been honored and all of that. But if they can solve it, yeah, having a plastic thing you stick in your phone is dumb. It totally is dumb. But they need to prove to me that they're not going to disappoint me before I switch.
And I'm realizing I lied because I now remember, I was just looking at my phone. I went into the store and said, I switched to an eSIM. I want my physical, I need a SIM card again so that I wouldn't, because I was so concerned about it. So yeah, I have a physical SIM too for the same reason. If I want to pop that into another phone, it's very easy to do and I don't have to worry about it. It's like, this is the thing that says, this is my number and remains my number. So yeah, I have that concern too.
And it's also nice, you leave the country, you swap out into the new SIM. When you get back, you just put your old SIM back in, you're back to where there's no fuss, no muss.
The beauty of the eSIM thing, though, so like Apple supports this now where you can have a SIM and an eSIM, and it's a dual SIM system. And it's really nice. Having only experienced this with my daughter when she was going away to the Netherlands, is you get an app, you get the eSIM, it installs it. It's like installing a profile or something. It installs into the system. Then you've got 2 cellular connections, and you can do things like, say, turn off cellular 1 and turn on cellular 2, or turn off the data on 1 and keep the voice on it, but use the data. You can choose to prioritize. So there's a lot of flexibility there. So you actually could do it where you just turn off your US SIM when you're traveling if you want to, and it stays in.
Right.
And then your eSIM is there
historically, but I think I'm on eSIM now and I'm quite happy with it.
Yeah, it's really nice. And some of the fear is you try it out like I did a couple months ago and you realize, oh, Apple has actually done a very good job of supporting this. It's built in multiple SIMs and eSIMs, and it's been there for a little while. They had a dual SIM phone in China a few years ago. They sort of kicked off this whole process. And like, yeah, I'm like Mikah. I'm just a little trepidatious because I'm worried that I'm going to have to, review an iPhone and try to transfer my number and then it won't ever come back. And then I had to charge up an Android phone. Yeah, I had to charge up an Android phone and get a Mint Mobile plan again really quick. It's a sponsor of the network, I should note. So that I could call AT&T and say, hey, I need this fixed. And no, it's not with this number. Yeah. It's with the number. Yeah, so that was scary. And that's why I was like, I need a physical SIM back as quickly as I possibly can. But if you're starting new, then that's fine. Go ahead. No. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I mean, I just feel very much in control when it's like I've removed this physical object from this one device. I've inserted it into this other device, and Verizon did not try to stop me. AT&T did not try to stop me. At no point did I have to say, oh, why do you want to use a new phone? Why don't you use our phone? Oh, why are you using Verizon instead of us? And that concern doesn't seem to have played out yet. But I just don't want to be in a situation like Mike is in, where something happens and now I have to trust a customer service apparatus to put things right and make sure that my cell number remains my cell number. I will say though that since we just talked about deleting the headphone jack, it is the SIM tray is another point of ingress for dust and for moisture and stuff like that. So if we believe that deleting the headphone jack was a good thing for the longevity of the phone, we also have to believe that the SIM card tray is another thing like that. So I think it's going to be, there's like a whole generation of people that I got into when ATM networks started popping up. I had no problems with it. Older generations had a problem with it, but for me, it took me 2 years before I would deposit checks by phone, because I'm like, this can't possibly work. I take a picture of it and I set a push and it basically but don't they need the check? And for like 2 years, it was available. It was available at my bank, but I would still go to the ATM once a month with like 3 or 4 checks. sometimes you just have to you have to dip a toe in the water and then just slowly let yourself get acclimated to a new technology. And I think for myself, if I'm being honest, eSIM is just like that.
Yeah, I'm more concerned with the unknowns of this, that there's going to be, like, it seems fine. Like, I'm totally okay with the idea there's a little bit of data on the SIM card. Now the data is an eSIM. Like, that's great. Like, fantastic. Why do we have these pieces of plastic? My concern is that you're gonna switch to a new phone for the third time, and you're gonna get a note that says AT&T has noticed that you've used a bunch of different things with your thing, therefore your account is locked. Or that they do it after a certain threshold that most people will ever hit, and then if you hit it, you've run into a brick wall and you have to go through multiple layers in order to get it taken care of. That's my concern. Is more just institutional incompetence or just a lack of focus on the part of a cell carrier more than anything else. But otherwise, it's great tech, and I hope it all works okay, because it sounds like we're going there regardless, and it's probably all for the best, but it may be a bumpy ride. That's what worries me.
Yeah, mostly edge cases like us.
Yes, we need to take another quick break, and then we will come back. I think we can go ahead and go into picks of the week after this. But I want to tell you about ITProTV, who are bringing you this episode of MacBreak Weekly. You've probably heard of ITProTV. If you haven't, well, you should. Your IT team needs the skills and the knowledge to ensure that your business is a success, and ITProTV can help you with that, because more than 80% of users who start a video actually finish it. ITProTV is engaging, and your team will enjoy learning on the platform. You can give your team the tools they need to make your business thrive. Courses are entertaining and binge-worthy. They keep your team interested, invested in learning. The tech industry is always evolving. It's changing rapidly, and your team needs to be trained today. When a new software release, system upgrade, or cyber threat faces your business, ITProTV offers the training and perspectives of those disruptions within days, if not hours. So why is ITProTV right for your business? Well, you can get all training and certifications for your team done all in one place. ITProTV has every vendor and skill you need for your IT team training. They provide Microsoft IT training, Cisco training, Linux training, Apple training, security, cloud, and so much more. More than 5,800 hours worth, ranging from technical skills to compliance to soft skills. And you can do so much with an ITProTV business plan. You can track your team's results by managing your seats, assigning and unassigning team members, accessing monthly usage reports. You can easily manage those teams, that's subsets of users, by providing them with customized assignments, monitoring progress, reporting on usage of the platform. And that reporting, you can get advanced reporting, immediate insight into your team's viewing patterns and progress over any period of time with visual reports. And don't forget that ITProTV has individual plans too. So for someone like me who's just super curious about what's out there in IT, those individual plans are great. You can give your team the IT development platform they need to level up their skills while enjoying the journey. For teams of 2 to 1,000, volume discounts start at 5 seats. Go to itpro.tv/MacBreak. Make sure to mention MacBreak 30 to your designated ITProTV account executive to get 30% off or more on a business plan. Thanks so much to ITProTV for sponsoring this week's episode of MacBreak Weekly. All right, we are back from the break. And actually, before we get into picks, there was one last story that I wanted to mention because I saw a lot of different people saying a lot of different things regarding the relationship between Apple and Jony Ive after he left the company. And now I'm having trouble finding the link here in the document, but there was conversation surrounding how long Apple was working with Jony Ive, and even if, there it is, in the New York Times, and even if that the partnership between the companies was maybe not actually a realistic thing. The article from Trip Mickle, quote, 3 years after promising to work long into the future with the man behind its candy-colored computers, Apple and Mr. Ive are through. So, how long do we really think that Jony Ive and Apple have been sort of collaborating with love from Jony Ive's own design firm, and how much of this is just kind of nonsense?
It was good PR. I mean, like it was good. I mean, I think there was probably some cracks. I mean, that led him to leave. There were some cracks probably for a couple of years before that, and so, I think that, he was very focused on some very specific design requirements that a lot of us, we just talked about, butterfly keys and really getting into this design, form over function that I think became pretty hard, became untenable in a lot of places. And I think that, obviously what he did was amazing and, for decades. But I think that continued, and I think Jony Ive had a hard time when he couldn't bounce it off of Steve. I think Steve brought a certain level of, no, let's not do that, like in a nice way, and so, and I think that without that, he was kind of, I think that there was a yin and yang there, that when Steve it was no longer there, I think at that point, things were going to just slowly unwind. Yep. He just didn't have it. He didn't have a foil.
Who's going to say no to Jony Ive other than Steve Jobs, right?
Exactly.
Steve Jobs dies, and they're like, well, Johnny is here to carry the torch. And it's like, well, who's going to say no to him? Is Tim Cook going to say no to him? Tim's not a product guy. Tim's like, oh, no. Johnny, you take care of it. I think that was part of the issue. This is, though, in general, it's just a long, slow fade, right? There's some corporate jobs end really rapidly, and others just fade away. And everything we heard is like he wasn't coming into the office regularly. He was bringing people up to his place in San Francisco. He got a new title that was sort of a courtesy title, but he was really kind of like removing himself from the day-to-day. Then they do the formal separation, but wait, we're going to keep a relationship with his new firm. It's going to be, and it's like for all concerned, it's good for Johnny. He gets some money. He gets to start his new business. It's good for Apple. They don't freak out investors about the fact that this design genius who is part of the revival of Apple is gone too close to the death of Steve Jobs, right? They got to space it out a lot. Because imagine if Johnny had left right after Steve died, right? Like, oh my God, everybody would have lost it. So, orchestrated, everybody gets a little money. There are some details about people saying, we're paying him what? He doesn't do anything for us. Why are we paying him that? And the answer is, you're paying him that because he's Jony Ive and you wanted to make it a gentle transition. And he has not been running the show of stuff. Like, is it, oh, by the way, we haven't even mentioned, like, there was a story last week on GQ in the UK which quotes Evans Hankey, who is Apple's lead designer, at length about the design decisions that she and her team made about the MacBook Air and about last year's MacBook Pros. And like, is it a coincidence that Evans Hankey was prominently featured in a press story that was pretty fluffy and very positive when this was all going on? Of course not, because they're sending the message that it's all okay at Apple. It's all fine. We love Johnny. We paid him a lot of money, and now their relationship is finally over. Like, it's very well orchestrated, and, you want to be that guy. You want to be the guy who they pay to not work for you for a while because they love you so much, and not the guy who comes in one day and realizes somebody else is sitting at his desk.
And the bottom line is that Apple did make a little bit of money from Johnny's designs, so they could pay him back a little bit, on the way out. There's a goal. I mean, it's not like he hung out for 2 decades and didn't create some of the most iconic pieces of hardware ever. So a little bit of and I'm sure he's doing just fine. I'm sure he's been doing just fine for a while. But I think that it's just,
I think he was bored, right? I think there's a natural endpoint, and I think it came at the point when Apple was desperate to not be seen as losing all of its key contributors because Steve Jobs had died. And so I think there was one of those things of like, Johnny, what can we get? Look, back when I had a senior vice president title at a media company, like you have those moments where you're like, what can I do to make you stay? I'll give you any job you want. I'll give you any title you want. I'll get you a raise. Please don't go. And I think that happened when Jony Ive was like, look, how many more computers can I design? Like, and he did design some amazing things, from the G3 iMac that saved Apple, really, and the iPod all the way through the iPhone. His contributions are legendary and will be, for decades to come, if not longer. But I think he was ready. Like, to all things, there is an end, and I think he was done.
I think the culture is very different at Apple too. I mean, I think that Steve had he was trying to get something done, and the logistics were something he handed off to Tim Cook, and then it was Tim Cook is working on the logistics, and I think that there is a more of a managed process and a more of a council of people making decisions, and it's a little bit more diffuse than it was before. And I don't think Jony Ive is the first person to complain about those situations, and a lot of people that just weren't. They wanted that kind of hunger and that edginess that came with Steve that they didn't have, and a lot of people have left because of that. It doesn't mean that Apple's making any. I mean, Apple still, Tim is really managed the ship pretty tightly and really grown the company. If you look at the growth of the company, you know, over the last decade, it's been pretty amazing. And so it's not like he's not doing it correctly. He's just not doing it the way that many of the old guard were used to.
Yeah. And was responsible for a lot of transformative products that were absolutely had a big hand in Apple's success. He also created the solid gold $12,000 gadget.
Your favorite, Andy,
and the $10 million tent that you needed to make sure people understood what you were going.
Don't forget the coffee table book. Don't forget the coffee table book of his great accomplishments.
Yeah, Sir Jony. I'm sorry, Sir Jony. We need to.
Yeah.
Yes.
Put some respect on his name. Let's get into the picks of the week now. Let's start with Andy. Andy Ihnatko, what is your pick of the week?
My pick of the week is something that's been around since February, but has just been sort of like validated as kind of safe for most people to actually use. It's Google's new version of ChromeOS Flex, which is they released it in February, basically telling people that, hey, it's in sort of experimental mode, but if your computer doesn't blow up when you install it, could you please send us an email so we can add it to the list of computers that don't blow up when you try to install ChromeOS Flex. But yeah, I mean, I've had it on this 2010 polycarbonate MacBook for like 2 months, and it does like what is advertised. It basically takes a machine that is at most can give you a nostalgic experience of what it was like to use a Macintosh in maybe 2013 at the latest, and actually turn it into a absolutely arguably a modern PC with a modern web browser that can run that runs the latest version of the Chrome browser, has the latest security patches onto it, hasn't been abandoned like 10 years ago, and the nice thing about it is free, and also you don't have to on this one I've actually just basically installed it as the primary OS, but you don't have to, just like on a Linux distro, you can install it you can create an installer USB stick and then just simply boot off of the USB stick, give it a try. I think that if you haven't ever tried ChromeOS, you might be surprised at how good it is after 10 years, 15 years of baking in the oven, because you will realize that it will make you remember that, gee, I do spend a great deal of my time in web apps, and the fact that it essentially is 80% a web browser, 20% notebook, desktop style features that make this usable as a notebook or as a desktop, that won't be quite as scary after you spend like a couple days running Netflix, running Google Docs, running iCloud apps on it. You might actually kind of like it. It's just a great way to take an old machine that's out of the closet, or in this case, I bought it for $10 at the MIT flea market like about a year ago, and actually have like I said, not a hey look, isn't this a wacky like time travel curio? It's like, no, this is as capable as a lot of what I would do on the M1 MacBook Pro that I bought last year. Again, limited to the stuff that I do inside the Chrome browser on my MacBook Pro, but nonetheless, over the past 2 hours, I've been looking at a Google Doc that we've got our show notes on. I've been checking up on other things in tabs in that browser. So definitely worth a look. Over 400 different machines are officially supported, and many that aren't on that list will also work fine. But again, you can try before you commit to installing it. Really good stuff, and I think you'll be surprised at how nice it is.
All right, let's go next to Alex.
So I generally don't like a lot of stuff that requires subscriptions, like little subscriptions that I feel like, oh, I'm going to get over it. And I signed up for this one, and I keep on going, I'm going to get rid of it, but then I use it often enough that and it's so cool when it works, which is always so far. And it's called PictureThis, and I just feel like I can't believe I bought an app that identifies plants, but there is something about it. You just see it, you see something and you go, what is that? And you take a picture and boom, it's there. It's like, okay, that's an agave, and this kind of agave, and this or whatever. And so like I found out, I took a picture of the plant by my pool, and it's got this huge pole suddenly coming out of it. And he said, yeah, that's an agave plant and it's going to die. But I was able to plan, but the point is that I started taking pictures. Like I had a tree that I couldn't decide. It came when I bought it. It came with the house, and I couldn't decide whether it was a lemon tree or a lime tree. And so I took a picture, and it was like, no, that's a lemon tree. And I was like, oh, I've been eating them too early. So anyway, but what was funny is that every couple days I'm out wandering around and I just have this curiosity of what I'm looking at, and I take a picture of it and it tells me what it is, and then I can get more information, and I can get, and I find that to be just, I guess beyond plants, I find it just fascinating that we have something on our phone that we just take a random photo and it just tells us what it is, and it's accurate, and it gives you a bunch of information. And to me, I guess I just feel like I wanted to bring it up because I feel like it's just magical. Like there's very few apps that I just go, I'm living in the future. Right. Where I can just look at something and just go take a picture of it and it goes, oh, that's what that is. And I'm like, oh, because there's so many times. And now when if I'm out for a walk, I just use it constantly. Like, oh, what is that? Oh, I wonder what that is. And what's interesting about it is when you have the app, it changes the way you look at the world, because there's like I'll figure that out. I'll take a picture and then I'll do a search on Google. And now I got to figure out how to describe it. Or maybe I'm going to upload an image to Google and we'll see if more come down. And there's like a process. When it's just effortless, you just do it all the time. And now, and then what happens is that everything along your walk, that you know all the plants. And then you start observing them in a different way from a different filter in your brain, and so I at first I thought it was just, I was like, from an AI perspective, I was curious, and that's why I bought it. And now it just brings me an odd level of enjoyment that's worth, I don't know, I think it's like $3.99 a month or something like that. And I keep on thinking for the first couple of months, I was like, I wasn't going to recommend it because I was like, I'm going to use this for a couple of months and see if I actually keep using it. But now I use it all the time. So it's pretty fun.
Yeah. That this is what augmented reality should be all about. They keep showing us demos of, hey, look, and you can have a dancing Pokemon on the top of your desk. Like, okay, that is a cool demo, but what I really want is to be walking around, and as soon as the thought occurs that, hey, is that a maple or is that an elm? And suddenly there'll be a dingus that says, "Hey, by the way, that's an elm." And by the way, it has a disease that all of the elms in New England are getting. So you should enjoy this one while you have it, because as you can see by the ends of those tips that that's the sort of, you're absolutely right. The idea of, hey, that's interesting, and maybe you will make a note and maybe you'll follow up on it, versus at the point of curiosity, you're feeding your mind. That is a very, very powerful thing.
I did not expect there to be this much plant death discussed on this episode. It's very disturbing.
Circle of life, man. Circle of life.
There's a free app called iNaturalist that does a similar thing. So if people want to try a free app, that would be an alternative. The interface is probably not as slick, but the machine learning models for this stuff. I also don't know any plants or trees and always wonder. And now you literally just hold your phone up. It is at the point of curiosity, like Andy said.
Very cool. All right, our next pick comes from Jason.
Oh boy, it's Scriptable. Scriptable is a free app on iOS. It started life, I believe, as really just the idea that you could use JavaScript. You could write JavaScript apps, do your JavaScript development, mess around with little JavaScript scripts on iOS, right? But I think it really took flight when it added in this other feature, which is support for widgets on iOS. So now you can write, if the apps that you use don't give you the widget that gives you exactly what you want, you can write your own and in JavaScript. And I did. So one of the things that I did is we had a bunch of terrible fires, as probably is about to happen again out here in California. And I wanted an air quality widget that used the Purple Air network. And I wrote a JavaScript widget that put the air quality in my local Purple Air, the nearest Purple Air sensor, on my desktop or on my lock screen on my iPad. And then I wrote one that parsed my weather station at home and made a widget of that. And then recently, I started playing around with Apple's new WeatherKit API, and I made a script that looks at the widget and pulls the forecast and charts it, and makes a little chart of my local forecast from data on the internet using JavaScript and just parsing it out, which is pretty amazing. So I made my own little widget, the equivalent of something like the old Weatherline app that went away, except it's my own. And I did it all using Scriptable, and it works on your iPhone. It'll work on all the different widget sizes that are available. You can write one script that will have different presentation in the small widget size versus the medium widget size versus large and extra large. And as a little tidbit, the developer is now beta testing a version of Scriptable for iOS 16 that will let you do that with lock screen widgets. So I'm actually going to be able to put my temperature in my backyard on the lock screen of my iPhone, which is also just pretty awesome. So if you've got an idea for something and you're wondering, why doesn't this thing exist? Guess what? Make it yourself. If you can do JavaScript, make it yourself with Scriptable.
That's
Jason,
very cool.
I hope you live a long life of happiness and health and safety. I just hope that like when your day comes, you've made arrangements so that on your tombstone will be some sort of a chart that's being generated by a script.
Automatically by a script. Yes.
That would be your perfect epitaph. You are that is one of the 8 things that you are the man of.
The chart is mostly going to be trending down at that point, which is unfortunate, but it's okay. I can accept it.
It'll trend very quickly until up about 6 feet, and then it'll flatline.
Yes.
How much? No, just track the amount of nitrogen like inside the casket. Say, you know what? There really is. You may as well like just not stop visiting because really there's nothing left to visit at this point. But thanks.
Well, this is very grim.
It's not just plant death.
Not just
anymore,
plant
Mikah.
death. It's Jason death now too. Whew. Okay, so my pick, I've been looking for just a nice, simple bag that is not necessarily a backpack that I can use when I go into the TWiT office in particular. And for me, I like to carry my water bottle. I like to occasionally carry, I've got this bag that goes over my shoulder that it's sort of like a purse. And it usually sits at my side, but when I'm going into the studio, I usually slip it in my backpack. And then I want room for the laptop that I take with me as well. And there are lots and lots of options out there. But Incase sent over this bag that I'm really, really liking because it's simple enough, but also has the things that I want without being so much more. So, it's called the two-way transfer tote, and the reason why it's called the two-way transfer tote is because it can be a tote. It's got handles for you to tote it around, which is nice, but it also has some D-ring loops on the back and some clips at the top, and it comes with straps so you can at any time convert it into a backpack. So I can, if I want to bring it in as a backpack, I can do that, and when I want to carry it as a bag, I can. And it's got water bottle spots on both sides, which is kind of nice because there are times where maybe I'll have my water, but then I will also have a beverage at work that's, something else. So then it can go in there. And plenty of zippered pouches. The inside, though, can hold up to a 16-inch laptop if you have it, which is what I have right now until next week when I transition to that new MacBook Air. And it is super soft inside and has lots of storage space, lots of open space to tuck things into. And as I said, I really like just the simplicity of this. I'm a pin guy, and I have pins on my bag, and I'll show you my bag. I have pins that I put on my bag, and so I'm planning on transferring some of these pins over to my that Incase bag, and I also have some other pins that I'm not. Hey, Jason, you know that one.
Yeah, the incomparable robot is right there.
Yeah. So anyway, there's plenty of blank space on that. That's a lot of fun. But I like this two-way idea that, hey, sometimes I don't feel like carrying it. I just want it to go on my back, and carry it as a backpack, and it can do that. So, and Incase, long time maker of products that are kind of purpose built to fit in particular Apple gadgets and Apple, laptops and whatnot. So, pretty enamored of this. It is available for $99.95 on Incase's website. And of course, we'll include a link in the show notes. And I saw, thank you. I saw somebody ask for it in the chat, but Jason's on that. So thank you, Jason. Again, simple. And so far, it's working well for me. So I wanted to give them a shout out for that bag. And with that, we have reached the end of this episode of MacBreak Weekly. Andy Ihnatko, thank you so much for being here. If folks want to listen to you on the radio, where do they go to do that and when?
Go to WGBHnews.org. They will live stream all of my appearances. They also archive all my appearances. You can check that out. I'm going to next up on usual time Friday at 12:45 in the afternoon Eastern time. You can stream that at WGBHnews.org, or you can actually go to the live stream of WGBH on YouTube. Or if you are in the Boston area, drop by the Boston Public Library. GBH has this big, nice studio in the middle of like this little cafe that's on like the first floor of the Johnson building of the Boston Public Library. The library is a lovely, lovely place. Get yourself a cookie, a cup of coffee. You'll have to pay for both of those, and you can watch the show.
Excellent. Alex Lindsay. Of course, folks can head to officehours.global if they want to check out what you're doing. Have you been broadcasting despite the COVID train?
You know, the great thing about it, this larger group that's built up around office hours is that I just said, I just need you guys to handle this for a while. So for a couple of days, Bill Davis and a couple other folks were able to take care of all of the, there's a huge machine that kind of runs it every morning. And so I'm just the puppet in the middle. And so I was able to go to sleep, and they took over and just ran great shows. I've started to kind of roll back in this week, and we had a great conversation with NFTs and making them and what it takes and so on and so forth on Monday. Today we were playing with lots and lots of microphones, so we were testing microphones together. And tomorrow we're talking about motion capture. Nick Justin from Drexel University will be talking about what that is, and then we've got Charles Klein coming in talking about color correction on Thursday. So it's, as always, it's a busy week at office hours. So.
Wowza. All right. And Jason Snell of sixcolors.com. Thank you for being here. Any stories you want to hint at, or
no?
I mean, tell us about
the macOS public beta piece and the MacBook Air piece kind of took it out of me. So regrouping for the summer, and I got iCloud photo library, shared photo libraries working, so I got to play with that a little bit. And so yeah, just sixcolors.com. Check it out. My compatriot there, Dan Morin, is now on paternity leave, so it's just me holding down the store for the rest of the summer. So we'll make it work. It's all good. We'll make it work. Oh, by the way, I'm going to just plug going to the BPL and seeing Andy live, because I've done that, and it was great. It was an awesome experience. You may not be able to go out to lunch with Andy afterward, as I did, but you can still appreciate his wisdom in the lovely Boston Public Library.
Which may not be a downside, because I really am quite much.
It's the MacBreak Mafia, You all
yes.
go out,
All right. Well, you can this week find me in a lot of places. Tomorrow on Windows Weekly, Thursday for Tech News Weekly and Hands on Mac, Saturday on The Tech Guy, and then I will sleep for 9 years after that. Oh, and tomorrow with Jason Snell on Clockwise, which is a podcast over on Relay, normally with my co-host Dan Morin, who, as Jason noted, is on paternity leave. So thank you, Jason, for being there. If you want more of this dynamic duo, you can have that tomorrow. All right, I think that's it. So now it's time for me to say, get back to work, because break time is over. Goodbye, everybody.
The world is changing rapidly. So rapidly, in fact, that it's hard to keep up. That's why Mikah Sargent and I, Jason Howell, talk with the people making and breaking the tech news on Tech News Weekly every Thursday. They know these stories better than anyone, so why not get them to talk about it in their own words? Subscribe to Tech News Weekly, and you won't miss a beat every Thursday at TWiT.tv.